Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning to walk through um, this reflection tool to use to think about our distance learning plans. And really more, not so much to think about the distance learning plans, but to think about the distance learning period and the impact that it had on us as a school community, as well as what it might mean for our programs moving forward. So my name's Erin Anderson. I know we are bringing together school leaders from two different authorizers today. I'm the Director of Charter School Authorizing for the Osprey Wilds Environmental Learning Center. Sorry, my dog is being very chatty right now. Heather and Addie, do you two want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Addie Washington, and I work with Erin in the Osprey Wilds Charter School Division office.
And I'm Heather Ross from Bethel.
So I am actually here just to kind of facilitate for them. They are, well, I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us, and especially thank you for making the time and the brain space right now. I know that it is really, this spring has just been unbelievable. And then with the murder of George Floyd a couple of weeks ago, it felt like there wasn't any room left on the plate, and then there was more support and more love needed, and there was more asked of you as individuals and as school leaders to give to your communities as well as your school communities. And so I'm grateful for you to make the space today to join us and to talk about, okay, so what do we do next? How do we take what we learned? How do we think about it critically? And how do we use it to really build on what we want to see for a just educational future in our schools? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to go on mute. My job is to monitor the chat. So if you have questions, we're in the webinar format today, so you probably can't unmute. But if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and I will help facilitate those with Heather and Addie. And you can also use, there's a Q&A function. You're welcome to use that as well if you'd like, and we can answer those too. And I'm going to share my screen and turn it over to the two of you. That sound good?
Yep.
All right, very good.
All right, and you can move to the next slide.
Okay, well, good morning. Addie and I introduced ourselves already, but I'm Heather Ross from Bethel University, and I serve as our charter liaison person. And as a brief intro, we wanted to share a little bit about how we started this project and our goals for the tool that we created with you. We know that the move to distance learning during the pandemic and this crisis in our community was a huge shift that happened quickly. We believe that teaching and learning will take new forms this fall and in the future. We feel that taking time to critically assess and reflect on this spring will have significant impacts on preparedness for fall. So what we had heard from school leaders this spring is that you are overwhelmed with resources. And in developing this tool, it was our intention that we share a tool that's created to be straightforward, ready to use, and manageable in terms of time and energy, so that you can be productive and that it's not a burden. Next. So the why is super important for me, and wanted to share with you that we created this tool for two reasons. First, as authorizers, we want to glean some measure of distance learning from the plans that your schools have implemented. And we know that you need to be ready for future periods of distance learning. And second, we believe that creating the space for your school staff to express and process distance learning may lead to the sharing of some valuable insights. And finally, what's on the screen, the lessons learned can be leveraged to strengthen your response to future disruptions to teaching and learning through the use of this tool. Next.
So before we kind of move into, actually, did you skip a slide, Erin, or is that how the,
the order that it goes in.
Okay, I'm gonna send you a
For
link.
Addie,
Yeah,
Addie, do you want me to share my screen?
yeah, let's do that.
Can we switch Aaron to me sharing? There we
Yes.
go.
Skipped a couple slides in there.
Okay, so here we are. Addie, are you? I see on the big screen the documents to reference. Is that where we want to be?
Yeah,
Is that what's showing up?
not for me. I see
Okay.
takeaways and evaluate.
Oh, I'm not able to share.
Hold on. Let me
Okay.
see if I,
Sorry, gang.
yeah, it looks like Addie, you may be able to make her a host, but I cannot.
Okay,
For Addie, do you want to share your screen?
Sorry,
Sure.
everybody.
it's okay.
Little difficulties.
There we go. Let's see. Now, can you, Heather? I can if you can't.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. Is everybody seeing docs to reference?
Yes, I can see.
Okay,
Okay. Perfect.
back on track.
So, Addie,
So
this is where
while
you want to
we-
be.
When we go through today, we're going to be talking about kind of these 3 documents that are in the shared folder that was sent out in the invitation to this webinar. And the first is the Distance Learning Plans Charter School Self-Evaluation and Reflection. That's the primary tool that we're referencing. It's a document. And then we've created a simple how-to guide that will remind you of the different pieces, and we'll kind of walk through that step by step as well. And then there's an accompanying PowerPoint that we've set up that's ready to use for you all for the different pieces of this process. And we'll kind of explain that. It looks very similar to the one we're using right now. And next.
Ready?
So the overall process that we've outlined has 3 main steps: evaluate, reflect, and act. And for each step, the folks who participate in this process will be asked to do individual reflection on some key questions. And then after that individual reflection, participants will bring their responses to a group debrief. And we've designed this to be a flexible process that could be worked through in different ways depending on the needs of your school. So this could be with a small leadership team, small groups of teachers. Depending on the size of your school, it could be the whole school, or it could be done with your board. Once you have a chance to look through the tools and have gone through this webinar, you'll have a better idea of what's going to be the best fit for your process in your school.
Okay, as Addie mentioned, the shared folder has a bunch of resources for you, and it includes this how to use this tool document. And this document is going to provide you with an overview of how to share out the materials, use the accompanying PowerPoint to walk through this tool with the folks that are participating at your school. It also lists helpful steps as to how to set up the meetings for the debrief sessions. And as a note, for questions part 1 and part 2, you may be able to reflect on these together in a single meeting, depending on the size of your group. And next, we're going to focus on walking you through what it's going to look like for you to use this tool and the PowerPoint with your team. And we're going to come back to this page once we've done the walkthrough.
So the first step is evaluate. And for this step, we're using the critical incident review process that's common in the nursing profession. Some of you may have used it also in your schools or in other lines of work. And it's essentially going through some big picture questions about distance learning. What happened, where, when, what was it that made this incident critical, and what were some of your immediate thoughts and responses? And then we've created this linked document called Evaluate Questions to Consider. And these are a few more fine-tuned questions about the actual implementation of distance learning. And once you look through those in your individual reflections, you'll be able to kind of see what the specific things are that we're hoping to get at here.
Addie, did that work to zap up the questions? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
And after the evaluate piece, we've created slides in the PowerPoint where when you're in your group debrief, you can record notes and things that are shared out just straight onto the slides so folks can see it.
So next, you're going to move into step 2, which is reflect. Again, this focuses on the critical incident review process. It brings you to a document, reflect, questions to consider that the folks on your team can work through. And in this section of the tool, we're really focusing on some big high-level questions. What are your thoughts now? What have you learned about your practice from this? And how might your practice change and develop as a result of this analysis? And you can see that this is a slide that's also included in the PowerPoint. These are tools that are available in the shared folder and may help guide your reflection for your team. And as with step 1, the next step would be to hold a debrief session with your team. Using the PowerPoint, you can use this slide to record comments and notes.
So the third part of the tool is ACT. And this is using Borton's kind of framework, if you're familiar with that, where we've discussed the what of distance learning, the so what, and we've come to now what. What do we do with this evaluation and the reflections that we've gathered? And so we'll take some of those earlier reflections and use that to articulate any next steps that might be needed. And the ACT questions to consider document, once again, will offer some ways to think ahead about what pieces you might need in the short term or long term and guide some of that discussion. And it's been our intention with this tool to support your needs as school leaders and school leadership, and including addressing distance learning in your annual report, which we know will be upcoming later on this summer into the fall. So for Osprey World specifically, the schools in our portfolio, we will be guiding some reflection on the distance learning period in the annual report process that we put out to you all. And we hope that you can just take the work that you put into this reflection and funnel that into that task and kind of bring that work together for you. And then the reflection piece, as a group, you can use this format if that works for you to record the shared takeaways that you bring together. And for the ACT piece, it may be that for part 3, you want to use a smaller group of folks who are going to actually be responsible for future decision making. Again, that'll depend on what the layout of your school is like. These tools are also included in the shared folder and are just some alternative framings for how you might think about those action steps. And we've included this reopening tool from Bellwether. And the steps that we've done pretty much align with their step 1. So if you were interested in using their tool, you could jump into the steps 2, 3, and 4 for some more detailed plan outlaying.
Okay. All right, so we've given you this overview of the tool, the 3 parts. And now we're going to go back to the how-to document and give you your next steps for how to move forward. First, identify the folks on your team that you'd like to participate. You can share out the PowerPoint that's included in the shared folder because that has links to all the related documents. And it's going to be each individual's responsibility to complete the self-reflections for parts 1, evaluate, and part 2, reflect. Next, for you as a school leader, you can set up your debrief sessions. Our thinking is that you would allow enough time for meaningful discussions, which could be about 90 minutes, depending on the setting in which you're meeting and the size of your group. Of course, you can use the PowerPoints to facilitate the meeting, take notes on those key sharings on the slides provided. And as I mentioned earlier, depending on the size of the group that you're working with, you could do the debrief for part 1 and part 2 together as one meeting. And then finally, as Addie mentioned, you're taking in part 3 all those findings from the earlier reflections and informing those next steps or needed actions as we move into the fall. And just a reminder of the resources that are included. There are some principles, some additional shared documents that you can download. And now we're ready for questions.
Okay. So could you two talk a little bit about, thank you for that. That was a really helpful overview of this tool. And it's a tool that I really hope that schools will leverage either this early summer as they're wrapping up the school year, or as they move into planning or additional planning for the upcoming school year. I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about the difference between evaluation and reflection and just how those first 2 steps vary or are different from one another.
Sure. So Addie, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that we approached this was from lots of different angles. And one of them was, it really felt like we're going to be starved for data over this distance learning period, and trying to come up with what were some of the data points that schools were identifying during distance learning and using. So that's the background for the evaluate piece, right? You're trying to look at any data that you have and be critical in thinking about your distance learning plan. And the reflection is more of, how did it impact you? How did it impact your students? How did it impact the families at your school? To take more time to be thoughtful. And Addie, what would you say?
Yeah, that the evaluation piece, we're hoping to offer some other tools to kind of analyze the value of what your distance learning plan offered to your school, the students, and to the community, and have that critical lens of thinking about what were the actual impacts and outcomes from this situation. And then the reflection piece, kind of bringing in some of those other pieces that might be more related to the community as a whole. And we speak a little bit to that too in the actual tool. We've got a couple places where we kind of outline our framing of that.
Yeah. So we got a question in the chat. Since we don't know yet what the fall looks like, would you recommend our team might use these tools now while things are fresh in our minds, or wait until we've had additional guidance from the state?
I would say it was designed for you to use right now. Capture stuff that's fresh in your mind, fresh on your hearts and in your experiences, and take this opportunity to gather up those amazing things that worked really well so that you can hang on to them, whatever the fall looks like, right? There's going to be some things that happened in your schools that you don't want to lose, and this is the place to capture them, as well as if something didn't work so well, right? If it, however big or however small, and as you worked through the spring, if it wasn't sorted out yet by the time school ended, then that's something that you may wish to spend some more time on and get a different plan together for the fall. Addie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would echo that. And we feel that there may be some value too in pausing to sort of take account of all the different pivots that have been made and the investment that so many folks have poured into the last couple of months, because I'm sure this is even more intense for most of you in a school setting, but so many decisions got made and so many things have been done. It's almost hard to remember back to that second, third week of March, and taking a moment to pause and acknowledge everything that's been done may also just serve as some closure for such an intense end to the school year. And we hope, if that's something that's going to support your team, that making a little bit of space to bring those things out and celebrate some of that and reflect on what's been hard will benefit your whole team.
That was a great question. Thank you.
So can you talk a little bit about parent and student voice in this. So I think that, you know, the tool sort of as it's designed right now really thinks about the people who work at the school. But can you talk about how this tool might be used to incorporate parent and student voice in the reflection and the evaluation process? And relatedly, a question came in that said, how are the parents included? I'm thinking about mom and dad with 4 students in 4 grades and how they were impacted by distance learning. Are there going to be surveys created to help administrative and teaching staff to help parents with distance learning, et cetera? So do you maybe want to address that? Are there more resources coming? But also, how might this tool, as it is, be leveraged to incorporate parent and student voice?
Addie, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. I will. A thought that comes to mind is I think as you work through the evaluate piece, our intention is that some of those questions will highlight pieces where you're able to see, you know, what we don't actually know how this distance learning plan impacted our families in X way, or we don't have any information about how this landed with our students. And being able to realize that maybe we do need to do a survey, or what other ways could we interact with our community to learn more about this. In this specific tool, we haven't provided those pieces, but you know, we've created these questions, kind of offering the critical incident review as a basic format because it seems to be flexible and succinct enough that it could be adapted to be used in other ways. What do you want to add, Heather?
I would say definitely consider the principle that is the stakeholders impact map that helps bring in thinking about all those different stakeholders.
Can you go back to that, Heather? Can you show that slide again?
That's a great question. I will try.
Just use your little back arrow.
Yeah. Here we go. And these should be linked so I can make it bigger. So I would suggest the stakeholder impact map would be a starting place for those conversations. And if you need to know, then of course we would encourage you to reach out to your students and families and community members in surveys or in other formats to find out how they experienced distance learning. And I haven't seen any good existing surveys from that. Right, there's just nothing you can plug and play that I've seen. Right.
And I would think that probably the data that you have, because likely, I know many of our schools have surveyed teachers, or not teachers, parents and families multiple times this spring. And that is probably data that needs to be considered as part of that evaluate piece, right? Mm-hmm. But I also think parent reflections on this, I would be such a critical piece to understanding how did this all fit together? Because if you're not including the whole cycle on that stakeholder map, then it's just really, you don't have a full picture. So can I ask,
good question.
How often would you envision doing this? Is this something that's like an end of the school year thing, or is it, you know, every time we pivot, or quarterly, or what's your sense for how often this tool can or should be used?
Not having been a part of a leadership team, I'll offer my tentative response, but I would say see how the process feels with your team, whoever you decide to kind of pilot the process with. And there may be pieces of it that serve your school really well, and then there may be pieces you want to pull out and use as a more regular practice. And maybe it's just specifically reserved for after primary periods of distance learning.
Yeah, and I would say the critical incident review process, it comes out of the nursing profession. So we're already adapting it to a different setting. And so as Addie mentioned, if this resonates with you and your team and you find it helpful, it feels general enough that you could adapt it to different situations that come up during any given school day or any given school year. But certainly it feels as though as we look ahead to the fall, and we're very likely going to be in some sort of distance hybrid in the school in a very different way than we're used to format for doing teaching and learning, that you could use this tool again in the upcoming school year.
So I want to open it up to the group. We're getting close to time. I told you I'm not going to keep you more than half an hour. So before we close, I just want to make sure we go back to the chat, see if there are any other questions that you want to get in before we close. And while you're thinking about that, I just wanted to echo, Addie mentioned this in the presentation, but I wanted to state that the, Audubon is trying, typically the annual report template comes out in mid-July or late July. We're trying to get it out earlier this year. Our goal is to do it hopefully within the next week. We're making some final revisions right now. And then we want to walk through, we'll probably do a similar type of meeting where we walk through what a lot of the major changes are, because the annual report's going to look different. There's just not as much data that we have available this time. So we're hoping that this tool will help inform some of what needs to go into the annual report, because the annual report is intended to be a reflection of the last year. What you learned, what went really well, and what you're going to do differently next time. But also, hopefully, this will help you organize your thoughts and make the process of writing the annual report a little bit easier. So be watching for that in the next couple of weeks here. And I think also, I am maybe jumping the gun here, but I think in the spirit of innovation that charter schools were founded on, we really, really hope you use this. And we want to hear if it works great, because who doesn't want to hear that? But we also want to hear how you adapt it to your unique context. What do you change and what do you do to make it work for you? What do you throw out the window because you're like, yeah, that's not helpful to us? What else do you need to make this tool so that it's relevant to your context? Because that's useful learning for us as well. And we'll do our best to be as responsive as we can when we get those requests. I think we like to think of that this is a living document. It's not done in the same way that probably distance learning isn't done. So we shared the Google Drive link with you, acknowledging that there may be changes and updates that come to these documents, or additional things may be added. So Addie and Heather, did you want to add anything else?
See, there is a question in the Q&A that came in, so we can just speak to that briefly.
How do you factor in or out the bias that comes with mandates? My concern is that our school's approach would have been different if it was not mandated. Yeah, well.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think my first thought is that we also hope in the process of doing individual and group responses or reflections that you're able to surface some of those thoughts and feelings, especially kind of honing in on your school's mission and values and thinking through how the identity and the root of your school team is a part of this conversation and how it was or wasn't a part of your distance learning plan. That's not a specific answer to that concern, but we are hoping that that level of conversation can get surfaced if it's a conversation that needs to happen.
I appreciate the question. I mean, it helps inform our work as authorizers and those conversations we have with different folks at different levels. And so I just appreciate the question. I don't have an answer for that, but thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would say I think it's important to document what things you may have done differently if it had been mandated or if it had not been mandated, and how you might have, in a best case scenario, if you had been able to make the call, what you might have done. Because it is entirely possible that this coming school year, there will be more flexibility. A statewide approach may not be the thing that works best because there are just different needs throughout the state. And so I think documenting some of those things of, we tried it, didn't love it. If we had our druthers, we'd do it this way. I think that that would be a very useful deployment of this tool. So thanks for that, Cliff. All right, well, it's 11:31, so we have to let you go because you have big, important jobs to do. We want to let you get back to them, but thank you so much for joining us today. Please reach out to Heather, Addie, or I if you have questions about the tool, and we will be in touch. If you need us to send it to you again, let us know and we'll do that too, and we'll keep you posted if there are updates or changes.
Yep. Right. Thanks, everybody.